Great, so now that we've covered ensembles and instruments, it's a good time to talk about macros. And to do this, let's flip over to Reaktor's application reference. On page 21, we have this very useful diagram of the two main structure levels in Reaktor. And if we flip up to page 20, there's this brief summation of these two levels. Now, the first of these is the primary structure level, and this is where we'll be residing for this series of tutorials. This is where instruments, macros, and modules exist. This is where we kind of build our instruments and we create music. The core structure level is a lower level kind of digital signal processing level. It obeys different rules, but these two work together to produce our final sound. So even though we won't be getting into the core structure, it's helpful to know it's there as you get into looking at different Reaktor ensembles and just understanding how these pieces fit together. And I encourage you to read this entire section. It's very useful, it's short and sweet, and it's something you may want to have just kind of printed out at the ready because you'll be referring to it time and again. But let's flip back over to Reaktor. Now what I've done here is I've loaded a tutorial ensemble called Synth1. And this can be found in Ensembles, Tutorial Ensembles, and Synth1 here. If I go up to the panel, I see that this is a very simple synthesizer. It consists of an oscillator, which is not depicted here on the panel, as well as an envelope, a filter, and an LFO. Now if I go two levels into the structure indicated by the breadcrumb trail, I have Synth1 here and I have another Synth1 here, and this goes actually into the synthesizer. I see our interconnected boxes that are probably now familiar to you from our discussion of a chord. This is of course much simpler. But what we have here are a number of operations that are contained inside macros. So this LFO, a low frequency oscillator, if we click on this side pane checkbox, it will tell us what this is. Notice here it says Lfo Macro, low frequency oscillator used for modulation of oscillator frequency. In other words, it's a vibrato. Now if we click into this, we see that it consists of all these different parts. And the use of the macro is to package all of these things in a simple box, in a simple graphical piece. So macros are like instruments, but they don't contain their own panels and they don't contain their own snapshots. They serve to contain structures and to make the workflow in Reaktor much cleaner and much smoother than it otherwise would be. We can also do this with envelopes. So we click on this, it says it's a macro, it describes what it is, and a filter does the same thing. You can easily imagine if we had all of these different pieces at the same level, how confusing it would become. And this is really about the simplest kind of synthesizer you can build. So this macro concept is very powerful for containing different operations. So in addition to the various macros that we have in the Synth1 structure, we also have this Sawtooth Oscillator. And this is an example of a primary level module. Now, primary level modules are really the fundamental units of the primary level. And they do one thing and they do one thing only. So if I right click here on anywhere in this gray area, it will bring up a context menu for me that will allow us to get a sense for what some of the primary level modules are. Here in the built-in module section, we have panel operations such as faders, knobs, buttons, and lists. Those, of course, are graphical elements that would go on our panel. We also have Midi in and out functions that allow us to tell different parts of Reaktor how to take in Midi and how to send it out. We have mathematical functions, constants, add, subtract, invert, signal path operations, oscillators, samplers, and on and on. And I do this not to blow your mind, but just to get you familiar with the fact that there are these primary level modules that perform very specific functions, and they're kind of at the very foundation of the primary level. So now we have gone all the way down to the primary module level. We've described the ensembles, the instruments, the macros, and the modules. And this has been a great introduction. Of course, I don't expect you to understand all of this stuff and to be, building synths from scratch from here on out. I do this just so that you have some familiarity with it when we revisit it later on, because we will be modifying some ensembles and even creating one of our own. So I hope this has been enlightening to you, and that when we come back, you'll find that you have a foundation to work from. And in the next section, we'll be going into what I call the most powerful interface in the world, which is covering all of the important and powerful functions of Reaktor's interface. And I think you're really going to have a lot of fun with this. So let's move into that now.